find it really useful to talk to people in the field delivering services. So let's talk to an MSP and MSSP focused on cybersecurity. Stephen Cook from Strategic IT Services joins me for a conversation, and he's got an interesting hot take or two on this bonus episode of The Business of Tech. Well, Stephen, thanks for joining me today.
Happy to be here.
I'm excited to have you. It's always fun to talk to somebody who's in the field who's actually doing it. So take a minute and give me a sense of who your organization is and what services you're delivering.
Sure. So we're kind of a full suite managed IT provider. We do everything from general technical support all the way through backups and disaster recovery, cybersecurity, managed IT. We kind of do the full spectrum, and through our various business partners, we do stuff that's not kind of in the managed IT ecosystem, such as risk assessment, such as web design, and stuff that's kind of a lateral thing right next to managed IT.
Makes a lot of sense. And so you're trying to outsource and be the technology solution provider for your customers.
Yeah.
Can you give our listeners, I know they want to know, can I give some sense of the size, geography, like what your organization looks like, how many people, endpoints, whatever numbers you want to use to describe the organization?
Sure. So we're a fairly small MSP. We're less than 10 employees.
Okay.
But kind of what we do is we help with all our various experience, we help people that have like these 50-person IT providers where you don't need it, through various means, whether that's streamlining processes, whether that's a little bit of automation or something like that. A lot of, especially the bigger the company is, they have lots of duplication and stuff going on, throughout the environment. So we kind of help do that, keep costs low without outsourcing completely or anything like that.
So interesting. So you lean more into co-managed IT is like kind of the bigger, so you're focused on targeting those sort of 50, 60 person organizations that have some resources and do co-managed. Is that a fair assessment?
So we kind of do a mixture.
Okay.
So, I have customers that are, one person solopreneur kind of shops. And then, we have customers that are in the financial sector and the energy sector and stuff that are a lot larger. Our customers do everything from, they could make, some of our solopreneurs can make maybe 10,000 a year in revenue. And I have ones that are in the, tens of millions. And so it's a very wide range, just kind of depending on the situation.
Gotcha. Okay. So you really are like positioning as that, IT supplementer to the organization. We're going to fill in the holes and help you out with that. Can you give me a little bit of a breakdown of, the sense of how much of your business, is recurring revenue, managed services, contract kind of stuff, and how much stuff is more transactional?
Sure. So it's about 70-30.
Okay.
So about 70% is recurring. We have larger businesses that kind of keep us afloat on the low, in the valleys and stuff like that. We support UPS, for example. We have different hedge funds and stuff like that. That's a lot more recurring. And, rather than, we every once in a while will get calls, hey, can you fix this? Can you fix that? Kind of one shot stuff. But most of it is actually managed IT.
Got it. Makes a lot of sense. So I want to get into sort of the meat of what you're seeing in the field, because I think that's the most valuable for the audience.
Mm-hmm.
You've named a couple of sectors that it sounds like you're involved in. I've heard energy there. There's transportation there. There's a bunch of mix there, and there's some regulations that fall into that.
Sure.
How much are you seeing regulation impact your customer needs right now?
Actually, quite a bit. For example, my customers that are in the energy sector, because of the current political administration, they actually shut down drilling for about the first half of the year. So they went from, having, their standard income to basically zero. So we kind of had to adjust with them. But yeah, we've seen a lot of regulation, whether that's, changes in like the NIST framework. They just released the newest things for quantum computing, that we're looking at, and all the way to GDPR and different things like that.
Okay, so you've even got customers that you have to handle in the GDPR and potentially NIS2 in Europe as well?
Yeah, so we support the US, the UK, and Canada.
Okay, got it. So you've got a lot of experiences. So it'll be very relevant for a couple of questions. I've been thinking a lot about the rollout of CMMC 2.0 and the various levels. Are you seeing that in the field with your customers right now? Are they having conversations about that?
Some are. I haven't kind of been super into those conversations. But yeah, I mean, it's happening, but I don't have a whole lot of kind of experience in that sector.
Okay, got it. So that's not something that you've leaned into yet. How about something along the lines of, are you looking at FedRAMP and like as one of the questions that you might have for your tool vendors? Like, is that because it's one of those areas where I'm curious to see how much it's happening in the field, because I'll give you my basic premise. Sure. There's a lot of these MSP based tools and MSSP based tools that are moving more and more into defense related industries or serving, right? So you might be dealing with something that's related to that. And one of the ways that the US government can figure out, which tools they're more comfortable with is FedRAMP certification. But as far as I can tell, most of the major MSP focused players have done little to nothing around FedRAMP certification. And I'm trying to understand, like, is that a demand that you are seeing now or you're expecting soon?
It's one I'm expecting soon. I think as it ramps up, it's really going to go that way. I like you, I've not seen much from the major vendors that do MSP kind of suites of software and stuff. I really haven't seen much in the way of FedRAMP kind of getting certified and stuff. It's more, I think they're trying to gear their stuff towards kind of typical MSPs, not necessarily government entities and stuff, just so they can hit a bigger market. So I haven't seen it too much.
Is it a concern though?
It can be. I think you don't necessarily have to be with FedRAMP to have a certain amount of baseline security behind your applications. And so this is something actually I had a sit down with one of our congressmen here maybe a month ago. And I was kind of talking about this because what's happening is small businesses, because of the economy and stuff, they've basically stopped paying for IT. So basically, I've seen companies where, they didn't have an IT, but maybe they're ramping up. So they're, starting to need someone more dedicated and they're just deciding not to do it. So for example, there's like a tree removal company here, in my local area that I was kind of in talks with. And basically I asked them, hey, who does your IT now? And they were like, well, my business partner works at a hospital and they know a guy who knows a guy, kind of thing. And I'm like, you're making millions of dollars. How is this functioning? And, but I mean, that's actually fairly common, especially on the small business side, is they're just either going without or they're going way underutilized.
So it's an interesting point because, so there's a lot of risk there in that space, right? So if as it stands right now, the software vendors that are deploying that are not liable for that risk. Those customers are essentially saying that they're willing to take all of that risk on operating. Like, is that something that you're looking at the liability as a pro or a con? Because I could see it both ways, right? There's an element of if the customer is accepting all of that risk, that could be a positive selling factor for helping. Sure. Or at the same time, it could be a big negative that, for example, that needs to get pushed onto the software vendor. How do you see that liability?
Well, I think you're exactly right. I think it can be a pro or a con. And I think a lot of the times it's not, a one or the other. I think it's a mixture of both. Okay. And it's just one of those things. I talk to so many business owners, especially newer business owners, and smaller businesses that they say, I want no risk. And, it's just one of those things in business they haven't quite learned yet is you can't have no risk because then you don't grow. You need to take calculated risks and what risk can you accept to get that growth. And so it's just, one of those things. For example, one of the main services that we provide is endpoint detection and response. And I know so many of those customers that I'm like, what kind of EDR solution do you have? They're like, we don't even run antivirus on our computers. And it's these days, it's I would say it's kind of crazy, but it's irresponsible almost to run a business without anything. Just because it's not just your information that's going to get out there. It's all your customers, all your partners, all your vendors. So yeah, I mean, it can be a major deficit for sure.
So interestingly, I would agree with you 100%. It's irresponsible to run a business that way, but I'm going to observe it's not illegal, right? If we think about it from the perspective of, assumed liability, the market has sort of said that this is one area that we're going to allow. But for example, you can't run a house contracting business without insurance. You can't be a banker without a lot of regulation. You can't be a doctor without a better. What's your take on the requirement here of making this more of a regulatory environment, saying that we would have to tell customers there are legal thresholds that you absolutely have to meet or you are breaking the law. What's your take on that?
Sure. So that's actually a conversation that I had with the congressman when I sat down with him. And so there was a cybersecurity act passed in 2022. But unfortunately the federal government can't limit private businesses too much, related to that, or they haven't been willing to. So for example, that cybersecurity act, it affects federal contractors and companies that are in sectors that the federal government, has deemed as critical infrastructure. So the energy sector, the healthcare sector, et cetera. And so that act really didn't do anything for private businesses outside of those sectors. And so it's one of those things where I don't think it's, malicious or anything like that, but I think because there's no regulation, people will say, well, how can I regulate? Like, what are the baselines? And you give them NIST, for example, right? That's the standard framework. But a lot of those references in NIST, it's not realistic for, say, a small to medium-sized business to do just because the ramp-up cost and stuff for these. So I think there definitely needs to be baselines, for any business, no matter what the sector, to do. But I just don't think like the NIST framework, I think it's too high level, to really apply for that. So I think we really need to get something that is a baseline for all business, regardless of sector. Now it doesn't have to be, this, like, you don't have to have like all these dedicated devices. It could just be something as simple as you have to have two-factor authentication enabled. You have to have certain level of password policy, so it doesn't necessarily have to be a ton of hardware or something like that, but there has to be some common sense things that businesses do to protect their customers' data.
So I'm at 100% in agreement with that. So what would be your take on like a national privacy law, right? That says that there's a baseline of data protection that every business is required to do, and violations of that would be, actionable, finable offenses. What would be your take on that?
Sure. I think that would be a good thing. They've already done it with HIPAA and other stuff. I know business owners especially don't like regulation. I don't like regulation necessarily either, but I think at some point you have to at least put some stuff, in place, just to protect the populace. You'll see it right now where banks are getting hammered. And then you'll go, you saw it with the CrowdStrike thing that happened, that it hit all these airlines and banks and everything. And then one of the airlines, I forget which, wasn't hit because they were still running Windows 3.1. And, the infrastructure is just so wide now that we have to put some kind of regulation, even if it's a very, very baseline thing like two-factor password policies. There has to be something to protect the populace. Otherwise, there's, it's just going to keep happening with these cyber attacks and these data leaks. You have to do something.
So it's interesting you bring up CrowdStrike, because it's a great example of what an incident can do without actually being a security incident. That was actually it's a quality issue. So I'd really like to get your take on the liability of the software providers in this case. So CrowdStrike's an easy example because it's very clear.
Sure.
They shipped they broke it. It's their quality concern. In the world of automotive, if you ship a defective car, you're liable for the repairs and the make good on them. But in IT, if you ship a poorly functioning product, you actually have zero liability.
Sure.
You aren't responsible for that based on the structure we've done. What's your take on that quality problem? Jenna Easterly's talked about it a lot in CISA. What's your take on the quality problem in software?
So I kind of have a hot take a little bit on this.
Okay.
I do think CrowdStrike has a certain amount of risk, and they have a certain liability for that. However, I think the larger liability and the larger, not risk, but the larger fault, I guess, is for these companies not implementing technology in the way that across the industry everyone knows it should be implemented. So no matter the sector, you talk to any managed service provider, you talk to any tech company, they will say you should not have automatic updates turned on from any vendor. You should, no matter what size of your company or whatever, you should, whether you have a test bed of servers, or if you have, if you're a very small company, maybe you only have one laptop or something, but you can test out these updates in a smaller area. And then if nothing goes wrong, then you can push them out, within a week or 2 weeks or whatever it is. And that's kind of industry wide. You go with Fortune 500 companies, they're not, for the most part, just pushing all these updates out. They have a dev environment or a test environment, and then that's where they do their testing if they're updating their applications. And then they'll do a phased approach, and they'll push it out to maybe a small segment of production if everything goes well. And then if that goes well, then they push it out enterprise wide. And so I think it's a mix of fault. But so many companies are just, turning on auto updates, and, so I think it's a mix there.
So my understanding is that the CrowdStrike product requires the ability to do that, to be able to do real-time requirements. And the statement that's been made was that, CrowdStrike was the one that chose not to do staggered rollouts and do testing there. So you're advocating that liability should be moved to the customer and the IT provider to be responsible for managing that risk of a quality concern coming out of CrowdStrike?
So I'm not saying necessarily like this CrowdStrike specific thing. It was more a general. So for CrowdStrike, if they require you and their application does not allow you to do a phased approach like this, then of course then they're liable, right? You don't, as an IT provider, as a company, then you don't have an option. But in most applications, you have an option to get phased rollouts and do a test and dev environment. So I think if, as a company or a managed service provider or whatever, if you decide not to do that, when the option is available, I think there has to be some give and take.
So, okay. So again, I just want to make sure that I understand your position. That you're saying that you believe that the IT implementer, i.e. the customer or the customer's advocate, should assume the testing and quality control for the vendor's products.
If they're implementing something that is not best practice. So industry wide, for example, it's a best practice to use a dev and test environment and then do a phased rollout.
So how would you know that, right? So how would you test the vendor to know that they are best practice compliant?
Well, I mean, that depends on your vendor, right? So each company, you well, whether it's best practices for VMware or whatever, you, as an IT implementer, you have to implement those. Whether it, it's just like any company, you need to work with the best practices and put a set of best practices together. Now, there are some industry things that are just known, whether it's in a framework or anything that's known that you should have, right? So if you have a critical application, for example, you should have it set up in an HA, so you don't have single points of failure and stuff. And that's the kind of things, that you kind of have to do. There's some general best practices that everyone in the industry basically knows that you should do, but a lot aren't, whether that's because of cost, because of manpower, there's lots of different kind of factors. But I think at some point there has to be some give and take if you're not implementing in a structured way.
I'll definitely give it to you. It's a hot take. Stephen Cook is the owner of Strategic IT Services, a cybersecurity company specializing in protecting businesses from digital threats. With nearly 2 decades of experience in the IT industry, Stephen is dedicated to developing robust security strategies that safeguard sensitive information and ensure operational continuity. Stephen, thanks for joining me today.
No problem.
Looking to reach an audience of thousands of MSPs and IT service providers? Put your ad right here on the Business of Tech and be on the show that 64% of MSPs report having listened to. A recurring top 50 tech news podcast, there are affordable options for you to reach our audience, and we can support any budget. Podcast listeners are more engaged, have a higher level of brand retention, and are more willing to listen to ads here than any other avenues. Want to know more? There's information at mspradio.com/engage, including a button to book a time to talk. I'm looking forward to that discussion. The Business of Tech is written and produced by me, Dave Sobel, under ethics guidelines posted at businessof.tech. If you like the content, please make sure to hit that like button and follow or subscribe. It's free and easy and the best way to support the show and help us grow. You can also check out our Patreon, where you can join the Business of Tech community at patreon.com/MSP Radio, or buy our Why Do We Care merch at businessof.tech. Finally, if you're interested in advertising on the show, visit mspradio.com/engage. Once again, thanks for listening to me, and I will talk to you again on our next episode of The Business of Tech.
Part of the MSP Radio Network.